All right, everybody, welcome to the Gildre Spotlight podcast. Today we have a very exciting guest. He is an exited founder. His name is Alex Bean. He founded a company called Divvy, which was acquired by Bill.com a couple of years ago. He is now currently a venture partner at Tandem Invest. But Alex, I would love for you to give a quick intro to our audience.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I live in Utah now, but born and raised in Seattle. I actually grew up in Redmond, and I lived in Redmond when it was a cow pasture, and then Microsoft and Amazon changed that. But uh, lived in Seattle, grew up. I'm a Seattle sports fan. Went to school in Utah, got married, have four kids. Been in the entrepreneurship world for quite some time. Some failures, some successes, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, Alex, I'd love to kind of start with your roots. You grew up in Redmond. I just quick background about me. I love Seattle. I lived there for about 3 years from 2018 to 2021. But you mentioned that you were there before Redmond. What kind of gave you the entrepreneurial bug? Was it seeing the growth of Microsoft come to Seattle in such a short amount of time, just kind of the development in your area, or what kind of led you to down the path of
So
entrepreneurship?
my great grandpa actually left Utah and came up to the Pacific Northwest in like the 50s for retail, basically, what is now considered Ace Hardware and J.C. Penney and like a Walgreens. And so the family had started a business. A lot of everyone, the brothers and aunts and uncles and everyone kind of followed. And then my grandpa took it from there, made it even a bigger thing. And then my dad ended up starting his own company. My brothers started their own company. And so entrepreneurship was always kind of the bug. It was always kind of talked about and discussed. It's not what I did immediately out of school, but then when you also see Microsoft and Costco and Starbucks and Amazon and Nintendo and all those around like start to have, come from nothing to become big, it does embolden you, I would say, like to say, okay, it is possible and you can go do great things. So kind of the mixture of being in Redmond and also being from the family I'm from, there was always the discussion of starting something or joining someone and going from there.
Very cool. And when you were, back in your adolescence, like in high school, what kind of person were you like? Were you like involved in DECA? Were you involved in speech and debate? Were you involved in like entrepreneurial clubs?
Oh
What
man.
kind of was your main focus
Uh,
back then?
that's not DECA, not speech and debate. I was probably as opposite of that as possible. I played quarterback for our high school, so I was more of the we'll call it I guess a jock. I mean, just because I played the sport. But yes, I'm super into sports. Played sports. That taught me a lot about life, more so about leadership and grit than it did business. But I wasn't ever really allowed to not allowed, but I really didn't work for someone in high school. I had one or two jobs, but most of it was like, okay, I have 6 weeks in between practices in the summer. Let's go start a landscaping business, and we would do some like we'd do swim lessons, we would do ski lessons in the winter when I had off time, and it was always like starting a business in high school. So even in high school, I wasn't working at an hourly rate. I was starting a business, and again, we had failures and successes in high school where you started to figure out how do you run your P&L, how do you get clients, how do you return next year, what's the messaging, how do you organize. So in high school it was a mixture of sports and kind of starting these like one-off small companies and kind of getting beat up as you do it.
And being a quarterback, I think being a quarterback for the football team is one of the hardest positions, just because you have a lot of pressure all the time. You have to run the offense. How did being a quarterback kind of help you develop into the leader that you are today?
Again, great question. Right, it's a long time ago, right? Like I'm 40, so that was 20 plus years ago. But the things that it always taught me is like a great entrepreneur, as an example, has to have vision, have to have clarity on what they're trying to become and where they're going. And if they have clarity and they have energy and they're willing to put forth the work, then people will follow. And a lot of what entrepreneurship is recruiting great people and saying, let's go climb that mountain and let's go. And like, that's where we're headed, and them to get excited with you and to see that same vision. And I would say a lot of those traits were fostered in high school. When you're the quarterback, you do have to lead And you do have to say, this is what we want to be, this is who we're going to become. And obviously, there's a lot of great people around you, but you have to help coalesce everyone into one boat, so to speak, and say, let's go do this thing. And so, yeah, I'd say those are the lessons I learned, not to mention just like working hard, but, representing as a leader. And then you have to carry that into being a founder.
And another question that kind of came to mind, did you have any, I guess, influences growing up? Anyone that you looked up to that influenced kind of your leadership style and kind of your career in general?
I mean, yes, right? It's like there was this person and how they ran their business. There's this person and how they worked hard. It was like kind of glomming on to a lot of successful people. I would say one of the things I would tell someone who was younger, let's say in their teenage years or 20s, surround yourself with super successful people that you want to learn from, and you'll start to emulate that person in this aspect of their life. You're going to emulate, like my dad had an amazing work ethic. So it's like my dad was out of the house at 6:30 and home by 7 and just worked really, really hard. And even in his free time, he was working. So like I emulated hard work from my dad, but my grandpa was a great visionary. And then my brother's friend who ran a successful business was really good at operating and building out the Excel models. So it's surrounding yourself constantly with successful people and just trying to be like, okay, this person does that really well. How do I learn that? And then constantly, trying to improve your inner circle.
And so you moved to Utah, you went to BYU. What did you study at BYU and why?
I studied geography, and I did it because it was the shortest major. I liked it, but I also just school wasn't my thing. I knew I wasn't going to become a doctor or a lawyer, and so I was like, all right, let's just study something I enjoy that's fairly quick, and let's get out. And that was always my plan, because my plan was to graduate and then to go work for these businesses that I knew were doing well, and try to attach myself as the number two or learn from the number one at a company, and basically just say, I'll do whatever you want. You can pay me whatever you want. So I wanted to get out into the business world as soon as possible. I graduated very efficiently from BYU with a geography major.
Interesting. And and I guess did you end up just going to university to just have that accomplishment, kind of that stamp of approval? Uh,
I went to school because I wanted my mom to not disown me.
got it.
And
Got
frankly, I loved it. It was a great experience. A lot of people, this is interesting, a lot of people I met freshman year of college, I'm doing business with 20 years later today. There's CEOs all over my valley. I know them because of our connection from freshman year. So college was a great time to, again, surround yourself with smart people, have interesting intellectual conversations with them, see what pushes them, and try to, learn off of that and challenge yourself against that. But I just was never going to compete in a school world that wasn't the world I wanted to compete in or was naturally gifted at. But I did what was required and was like, all right, let's get out into the business world.
what was kind of the Salt Lake City. Now it's known as the Silicon Slopes. But 20 years ago, what was it like then? Did people think it was going to turn into the
No,
Silicon Slopes it is today?
no. So again, I'm from Redmond, as I said, and Redmond is the birthplace of literally the biggest companies on the planet. And in Utah 15 years ago, or when I was going to school 20 years ago, it really wasn't. It was like a lot of, you had like WordPerfect, which is a precursor to Microsoft Word that was here, but for the most part, you had a lot of insurance agencies and dentists and banks and a lot of like we'll call it locally served businesses. There weren't a lot of big thinkers, but we had a few pioneers come through, talented people that kind of like showed the area that you can go beyond just the serving a local market. And over the last 15 years, you really started to see some of that blossoming happening. And over the last 5 to 7 years, you've really just seen it like kind of shoot up. We still aren't in a market that builds the largest companies in the world. We do a very good job of creating revenue from like 0 to 10 million or 0 to 100 million and then selling it. But yeah, it's drastically changed in terms of, and the best way I describe this is a lot of talented people that aren't connected to Utah, either from their religion or their families or their schools, are moving to Park City, are moving to Utah. because the ecosystem is very approachable and they know that they can start something here. And the other thing is people that used to graduate from Harvard or Stanford and they used to go to New York or LA or San Francisco are graduating those places and coming to Utah for opportunities. And that's been really exciting. So that talent begets more talent. And it's kind of like you just start to see it build on itself. And that's what's been happening.
And I also think that people are realizing that they prefer the nature and outdoors as well, right? And going to be able to ski on the weekends and
Well,
not as
I
much
mean,
traffic.
even that you kind of said is funny, right? Like ski on the weekends. A lot of people will ski in the morning and they'll get to work by 10 a.m. And
That's
because
amazing.
it's 15 minutes from our office. So, you get a lot of people that mountain bike or golf or they're out in the mountains and they get to work by 8:30. And that's a work-life balance that's created a culture that people want to be part of.
I love that. I kind of see similar parallels in where I'm from in Missoula. A lot of technology companies are going there,
Yeah.
top talent moving there. But going back to your career, so you majored in geography, and I know that you wanted to kind of the fastest route to get a degree, but kind of another question, how does a geography degree equate to working with technology? I know you started your career in sales, but how does it equate to doing that, or did you kind of have to
No.
start your career from scratch?
Yeah, no, it doesn't. So here's the thing. Geography, you could define it a lot of ways. There's obviously like studying maps and climatology, whatever. That stuff's totally irrelevant, doesn't matter. The thing that it does matter is geography was the study of people and place. So why is New Orleans have its culture versus Japan have its culture versus America versus France, etc. So some of that study of how geographies and cultures foster and ultimately, like for example, selling a product into Europe is entirely different than selling a product into China, which is entirely different than selling a product in Seattle versus New York, right? So I think maybe it helped me a little bit as you sell and go to market to figure out what's the messaging to the different type of people and who you're going after. But largely, no, I had to start from scratch after college to be like, okay, now I want to learn. And by the way, I'm not a coder, so I wasn't learning, how to be a developer. What I was learning was, okay, how do I grow companies? How do I market? How do I sell? And someone said this, I think it was on Twitter or something recently. So someone said it, I'm going to steal it. You basically, when you graduate college, you should decide if you're going to be a builder or on the revenue side. Otherwise, you're an expense. And it doesn't mean there's not operations, but it's like with your mindset, are you going to learn how to build, which is product management, engineer? Are you a builder of the product or of what you're going to ultimately sell? Or are you going to bring revenue? Are you going to market? Are you going to sell? Pick your path. And I was always going to be on the go to market side. So basically just started reading books and studying things online and meeting with people that were doing it and tagging along to businesses that had good to go to market. And that's where I spent my life trying to figure out revenue, sales, marketing, go to market.
And so was I guess, when you first started your career, obviously, or you started in sales, did you think that you're gonna, work your way up, ultimately, creating your own startup, uh, pretty much from scratch? And do you think that, I guess, how do you think starting your career in sales ultimately led you to be that successful entrepreneur?
So I actually think it's kind of sad. I think a lot of people fall bass backwards into sales. Like they don't intend it. Like a lot of people just kind of like find themselves in a sales role and they're like, well, I never really wanted to be a sales rep. And I get it. But what I would tell someone is I'm like, look, you have to learn how to build a product or to sell a product. And if you're going to be the founder of a company, you kind of have to learn both, but ultimately you have to be very good at one of the two. And sales allowed me to do two things very, very well. One, it allows you to figure out how to drive revenue. Like, hey, we've got one customer, how do we get 100 customers? We've got 100 customers, how do we get 1,000 customers? And like just constantly figuring out how to bring revenue, because guess what? That's what your company is designed to do. The other thing that I didn't really expect it at the beginning, but as I started Divi, it became very apparent that this was one of the powers that being in sales allowed me to do, which was I could figure out our product market fit before we had built the product because we designed the product and just using like Figma mockups, or at the time it was Envision, I could go and sell it to our target market and say, this is what we're selling. And that target market, that buyer would respond to me in a way that we were able to continue to make tweaks. So I was almost acting like a product manager as I was like proactively selling. And that allowed us, I mean, to go to market at the beginning with like surety of what we were building because I knew what they were buying. And because I knew what they were buying, I knew what we could build. And that allowed for us to get that product market fit at the beginning, which I think was really valuable.
I
So,
want to
so
go
for
back
example,
to,
a lot of people are afraid of sales, which I totally get. It's an uncomfortable thing and they don't want to ask. But like I'll go into these, startup groups or founding discussions and I'll say, all right, you got this good idea. Do you know what the difference between an idea, a good idea, and a business is? It's
execution.
it's selling. No, it's not even execution. Like you can go have a good idea and build a cool idea and be like, we have a really good idea. But until you step out the door and ask your buyer to pay for the dang thing, you have nothing. You have nothing. I don't care what you think you have nothing. So if you're that good and your product's that good, go prove it by selling it. Go ask someone for money. And that's not easy or comfortable, but that's what's required of a founder to make sure that they actually have something. And I see that miss a lot, like really smart people who are feeling like they're building it. And I'm like, go sell it. Then you'll know if you've built something people really want.
Yeah, that 100% makes sense. And also always I think a lot of the best CEOs and founders are amazing at sales. Um, just curious. So you started out your career kind of in traditional TV advertising at Kira. How did you get into that?
Channel 7, CBS affiliate. And look, I had another company I worked at for a few months, and there was a guy I really respected that was really successful that my family knew, and he was in the TV world. And so I was like, well, let's go. I want to emulate what he's doing. So I went and talked to him. He said, hey, we're hiring. I'm like, great, let me check it out. I got hired. I was actually quite good at it, but I realized after a year of being there that it was like a dead industry, like just not an industry that wanted to evolve or innovate or disrupt. And so it wasn't something I wanted to stay in, but I also learned a lot of my sales chops from, you know, getting to Seattle at 8 a.m. in a cubicle and picking up a phone and calling 100 people a day. I mean, that's what it was.
Yeah, I did start my career out actually in Seattle, much like you, at a SaaS startup, and literally would dial 70 to 100 phone calls a day, which is probably some of the most humbling work that an individual can do. Getting used to all the no's, it kind of builds and creates thicker skin. But yeah. So then you worked sales. You're director of sales at Lucky Scooter, director of sales and marketing at First Consulting, VP of sales of Surge. What made you finally, take that leap of faith, going from a stable career salary into starting Divvy?
Yeah. So two things. One, Lucky Scooter was actually I was more of the general manager, which means that was my first time running a P&L and managing teams, hiring, firing. So I got a taste of what it looked like to run a company then. And we had about 20 employees, so we weren't big, but I was young and it was a great learning experience. And eventually, so I was at a company called Surge. We were growing very well. We went from like 7 million to 50 million in 2 years with like a sales team of five, like including marketing. It was just basically like no one. So it was going really well. And my partner at Divi kind of called me and said, hey, I have this idea. We met, we chatted. And I knew it was a big idea. I knew it from our meeting and from some initial discussions, and I called a few people that were going to be our target buyers, and I could see it. I'm like, I know where this goes. And I remember telling my wife, we had 3 kids, so 4 kids at the time. No, 3. We had 3 kids at the time. And I said, I think I'm going to quit like this company. And I won't say what I was getting paid, but it was significant. It was getting paid very well. And I go, well, I think I'm going to leave this high paying job and take an 80% salary cut. So I went down 80%. And she's like, really? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, all right. I trust if you believe in it, then let's do it. And so I talked to my brother-in-law, talked to my brother, and they were all kind of like they believed it, but it's also like, man, that's a big risk. But I felt it like in my core that this was something that we could go build. So both my partner and I were non-coders, and I was more the seller, but ultimately we both went in there with this business mindset of like, if we can go recruit talented people to help us build this thing, I know we can sell the lights out of it. And frankly, that's what happened.
And for those that don't know Divvy, what is Divvy exactly? I know it's a
Yeah.
financial service for companies to automate kind of the
It's a
business.
credit card with software that we put together. So we made money like a credit card so we can give the software away for free. And we'd say replace Concur, Expensify, use our card, get rid of expense reports altogether, and we automate it, stay within budget, and we give it to you for free. And that was what it was.
So you had that epiphany, talk to your family about taking the 80%, pay cut to start Divvy. What was the first step that you and your founders made to start Divvy?
We had to mock up like I use this theory called the billboard theory. So I want founders to understand this because I think it's a very easy template to figure out what you're doing. So we knew the original idea was like, well, people are sending in expense reports 2 to 3 months later, and as a business owner, we have to just like accept whatever they send us and basically reimburse them, and so it like ruins our margin, or you don't see the expenses coming. So we're like, all right, we know who the buyer is. It's going to be a head of finance, whoever runs finance at a small company. That was our buyer, and we'd felt it. So like we kind of knew through our businesses that we were part of what it looked and felt like, but we're like, all right, we got to like mock this up. So we mock it up. And we're like, who's our buyer? First thing on the billboard is we know who our buyer is. It's the head of finance at companies 5 to 50 employees. That was our original target. Said, okay, are we going to save them money, make them money, or save them time? Well, we were going to automate expense reports saving them time, and do it for free, saving them money. So we said, okay, well, we're not making them money, but we're going to start with like giving them more control and doing it for free. That's going to be our main thing. So then it's like, all right, what's the billboard? So we know our buyer, we know what we're offering them. Now, what are we offering them? So if someone's driving down the road at 90 miles an hour and they see it, if our buyer sees it, will they know what we're offering? And we'd say, spend smarter, stay in budget, and do it all for free. Like, eliminate expense reports and do it all for free. Something like that. It was like that one sentence. So our buyer, heads of finances, would be like, wait a minute, you're going to automate expense reports so I don't have to do it anymore, and you'll do it for free? Interesting. And what we had to do from there is then put it in, we had to draw up the product. So we just, mocked it up using Figma and said, here's what we're doing. And I called every head of finance I knew on LinkedIn, friend to friends, family. And I basically was selling them before we had any product. So I probably sold 20 accounts hundreds of accounts really before we even had a product, because it took us a year and a half to build the thing. And all I was doing in that prep was calling these business owners and these heads of finance and saying, hey, this is what we're offering. And my point to that is if you can't answer your billboard clearly as an early founder, it's going to be very hard for you to build a product if you don't know who you're serving and what you're serving them with. And so that's something I would challenge all early founders to really put themselves through, is the billboard theory test.
Is that a common practice for, I guess, SaaS software companies to, before they even have the product built, to call up and get as many customers as possible and then build the product around that? Or is that common practice?
Um, you know, I think a lot of people think that they're doing it and they're not. But I think what they're doing is they're calling people and saying, hey, what do you think? And that person says, oh, interesting. And they say, oh, cool. And then they're like, okay, cool. And they're hearing it in their mind that they think the buyer wants it. And what I'm trying to get to teach them is like, I don't care what your parents think, what your spouse thinks, what your friends think. They're all irrelevant. Don't even like bother. You can tell them if you'd like out of being polite, but it doesn't matter. Tell me who your buyer is and go talk to that buyer and tell them what you're offering them, how much it's going to cost them.
Hmm.
And if their response is like, oh, cool, yeah, you don't have anything. If they're like, wait a minute, like, what? Like, you can do what? Like, then it's like, okay, well, now you're onto something. And if they're saying, well, when can I buy it? Hey, I'd like to sign up. There's a difference between an idea and a business. A business is one where the buyers are buying. That is a business. And a lot of people don't bridge that gap because they're afraid to sell, frankly, and they want to keep building and tinkering and building and tinkering until they hope that the buyer buys. if you're a founder, you better be extremely confident that that buyer is buying. And you do that by mocking it up and basically creating a billboard theory and selling it to them before you even have some. So I don't know if it's extremely common, but I would advise you to do it.
Got it. And was this some, the problem that Divvy is solving, was this a problem that you were facing as, director of
Yeah.
sales at your past experiences?
So I was, but my partner faced it more as he ran a pizza company and he had 5 locations, and each manager was swiping their own card, and 2 months later would send him a expense report with $3,000, and he's like, "Dude, that was like our entire profit margin." So I had seen it, but he had really felt it, and so that's where he leaned on his experience. But I had seen it as well running my company.
And were there any other, bigger players in that, I mean, that were offering a similar service as Divvy when you first
Yeah.
launched?
Well, not bigger players. There were other players across the world that were doing glimpses of what we were doing for sure. Some pretty similar. Um, we felt like we had to go build kind of all of it and then go to market with it, because what we were building was kind of bringing together Expensify and Amex and putting them into one. Um, so like Amex was out there, but Amex didn't provide expense reporting software, and Expensify was out there providing expense reporting software, but not the credit card. And we were saying we're going to provide both. And so there weren't really players doing that, combining both, but there was definitely a lot of players doing both individually.
And why don't you think, why were you guys the first to market with this exact idea? Why don't you think others were? Because it's brilliant. I mean, I'm
Um,
surprised other players weren't getting involved.
yeah. So, I mean, I'll give you Amex example. Amex is old. The processor it's built on is like old, like 90s, I think it was when it was built. So it's just like technically it's older. So it's not easy to write all the APIs into it. You had the corporate card team, which was in New York. You had their expense management software team, which was in Arizona. They had entirely different P&Ls. They're just running as separate companies. And so, they actually just announced an acquisition in this space like last week, meaning it's taken them, and I met with them 15, 20 times. Like they knew what we were doing. They wanted to do it, but it took that elephant 10 plus years to finally move and shift to move to where the cheese is. And the thing is they're already growing. Like they didn't feel us biting at their heels because they were also growing, right? They're growing the credit card market at the top of the funnel. So when we're stealing at the bottom of the funnel, it wasn't like it was impacting their bottom line enough they didn't care until there was multiple players in this space doing it, and they really started to say, okay, wait a minute, we're missing out on some pretty important stuff, and now they're really making changes. But it's because inertia is a powerful force, and to change your business model, for example, Concur or Expensify would have to literally shut down how they're making money by selling software, get credit cards into the hands of all their customers, and say, hey, everything we've sold you is now free, and we hope that we make more money. And it's like that just wasn't something that they were going to do.
And with Divvy, did you get any type of outside funding, or did you bootstrap this whole
No,
entire
we
endeavor?
did. We definitely got outside funding.
And a lot of founders, I think, once they get funding, you know, this is kind of a critical moment in the entrepreneurial journey where you can either grow and expand really fast, or you don't strategically grow. You hire too many people, and sometimes the company crumbles.
Mm-hmm.
After funding, how did you grow Divvy strategically?
We hired too fast and almost crumbled. Like, let's be clear, right? Like we hired too quickly. We hired a bunch of C-level people that wasn't their fault, but like what's a C-level, a chief marketing officer going to do when we don't have a product for a year? It's like, yeah, that was dumb. They're not managing teams of marketers. So we hired too quickly. That was on us. That was a mistake. But we had to make the decisions when we made them to say, hey, let's level set, let's figure it out, who are the right people, and we had enough funds to successfully get through it. Which is part of it's a macro. Like part of it is we built this in a time where it was easier to get some fundraising, which allowed us to go big and to go all at once. Don't know if that's exactly possible today, but yeah, that's what we did.
And so you grew really fast. You hired a lot of people. And what when did you as the founder make the realization that, we have to figure out something, and basically trim the fat for this company in order for it to succeed? Kind of when did you make that, when did that epiphany happen?
So my partner was CEO, and I think we had two. We probably have two times in our history, maybe three, but I think it was two like resets where it was like, all
Mhm.
right, hold on, we need to reset what we're doing, who's doing what, how many people we have here. And it's just because you need to be like out in front. Meaning, I've had people come to our door because we do venture capital now, and they're like, well, we need to fundraise. And I'm like, well, how much money do you have left? And they're basically like, a month. And you're like, yeah, you're done. Um, we were always trying to be a year out, maximum, a minimum 6 months. So it was just about staying ahead and looking at our forecast, looking at our burn, looking at our growth, and just trying to manage all the levers to make sure that we were in the right ballparks in terms of growth and burn that would be acceptable. So when we went to go raise and still had plenty of money, that we carried some leverage into those conversations and could get deals done.
Got it. And another kind of curious question, as you're scaling, how did you structure? Do you have like a company all hands meeting? Did you have a C-suite level meeting? How did you structure your meetings um, with
Yeah, it
Divi?
evolved. The early days when you had less than 20, we had a lot of like all hand meetings where basically everyone made every decision. As you get bigger, you have your executive meetings, you'd have the occasion. I think we'd have like a weekly all hands meeting, but um, you don't want to bog people down with too many meetings. Like, only have meetings if you're really trying to make sure the ship's in line and everyone's going the same direction. I see a lot of companies. Frankly, this is what prevents the big companies from moving as quickly as the small companies. Is they have 1,000 meetings that they're trying to go, and so what takes another startup an hour takes them months. And so I would suggest to people be a little bit more nimble. Try to prevent being bogged down by meetings, or make them shorter if you're going to have them. But we would have weekly all hands, weekly executive. But if there was nothing to discuss, we would just cancel it.
And to understand kind of the timeline with Divi, so you started in 2016, built up the product, started getting leads that first year. So, and then you got fun, or like just I kind of want to understand the timeline of Divvy. When did you get funding? How fast did you scale? How many employees did you have? And was your ultimate goal to have an exit, or did you want to grow it even more?
So yeah, I think it's fair to say that we always looked at exiting. We raised 10 million early on. Again, friends and family, and we were in a fortunate position there. We then started going through venture, through Pelion, which was our Series A. We probably had 15 employees then, maybe 20. Pretty soon after, we raised like 30 something, and I think we had probably had 40 or 50 employees at that point. And then we needed another big round about a year after that where we raised like 150, and we probably had 150 employees or something like that. And then we grew up to around 700 employees when we sold a couple years after that. So we grew from $0 in revenue to about 150 million in like 3.5 years, 4 years.
That's incredible. And what was the beginning like the obviously the friends and family was like the pre-seed round the most difficult round to raise, or what would you say the most difficult kind of stage of fundraising was?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's probably more nuanced than this podcast allows in terms of just raising during the middle of COVID was its own nightmare. So that's the answer. But obviously, raising early is always tough. We fortunately had friends and family that believed in what we were doing, and so that wasn't the hardest. Um, I would say it was more later stage when you had a lot of money. You were asking for a lot of money, and there were things going on in the world like COVID that threw a lot of wrenches into our plans.
And another kind of question on as you're scaling, how did you, as you got to 500 to 700 employees by the time of exit. When you hired a new employee, did you understand kind of what kind of ROI you'd get from each individual contributor, and how did you measure that? Besides sales, sales is obviously easy, but for like product and
Yeah,
programming.
um, it's a good question. It's We tried a lot of different things. It all didn't work, but some did. And ultimately, we're just trying to figure out like who's building what. Like I remember one time we were in this meeting. I won't name names, but like there was one guy who was in theory the leader, and his number two was actually the one like doing everything. And I left the meeting and I told my partner, I'm like, dude, the leader's not doing jack. Number two guy's doing everything. And so we'll let the leader go. And you see it. So it's like talking to your leaders and managers, like who on your team's like actually building something. And frankly, it's like unfortunate it comes this way. But when you go through a riff and you need to cut back 20% of your team or whatever the number is, 30%, 10%, it forces you to be like, oh yeah, who can I not live without? Who's actually like doing crap around here? And those people usually tend to make it. And the people that are doing a lot of fluff stuff or maybe not hitting their numbers or maybe not delivering and making excuses, regardless of what position, um, the fluff people are going to go, and the people that are performing and delivering and shipping code or whatever it is that they need to be doing, those people stay.
Got it. And then, so, you know, Divi had a major exit, $2.5 billion. What was that process like? Uh, the entire exit. And did you feel fulfilled after that? Did you feel like you accomplished everything that you wanted to accomplish in your career? There's nothing more that, I mean, a lot of founders' goals is to have that billion-dollar exit. So
Yeah.
what was that process like, and how were your feelings
Well,
after?
the answer is yes and no. The reason it's yes is because that's everything we wanted to achieve with Divi, and super proud of what we built. Happy about the outcome. Put it into good hands as we left, and all that we felt good about. Um, the reason it's no is because once you get to the quote top of the mountain, you realize that what are you going to do now, and what is the next mountain you're going to climb, and you got to go figure out what you want to build and who you want to be, and that's its own process, which is why I wrote the book Factory for Good, basically outlining my whole experience kind of post Divi and how I was both fulfilled and excited, but quickly it moved to unfulfilled and needed to find a new purpose and needed to strengthen relationships and figure out what my legacy was. And yeah, so it's a process. So in short, super proud of the exit, but by no means was it just this magic pill of perfection where everything after that's happened since that day has just been perfect, because it's not accurate. There's still a lot of things in life. Life has a way of finding problems.
And did you think that you were going to exit? So, because it was what, around 8 years that you worked on Divi, and there was an
It
exit,
was
or how
about
many years did you,
four
about
and a
five?
half, 5 years. 5 years?
Jeez. Did you think it was going to happen that quickly?
I mean, no. I mean, I think that's unrealistic to think it was going to happen that quickly. And so, one thing that I'm grateful for is, yeah, I mean, there was speed to what we did. Obviously, it could have been bigger or whatever, but like, we did it fairly quickly, and that's exciting.
And now you're a venture capitalist at Tandem. Was that your goal after, post exit, was to get into venture capital, or what was kind of your
No,
mindset?
I hadn't thought about it at all. I ended up just wanting to help founders, like meeting with founders and talking to them about their businesses was the only thing that I found interesting and engaging. And I wasn't ready to go back and like start a full like a operational company again. So yeah, my partner came to me, McKay, and was like, "Hey, I want to start a VC firm." I like hadn't even thought about it. So when he asked me, it was like, "Okay." And then when we actually got into it, I realized I loved working with the founders and was investing a lot of my own money in this type of stuff. So I was like, "Well, I can be first money in, and we can invite others to join us." And it's been a lot of fun since.
Well, Alex, this has been an amazing conversation. If you have, you know, any words of wisdom or advice that you can share to our listeners, what would that be?
There's a lot, but I'll give you the one I used to always give at Divi, which was things are never as good as they seem, they're never as bad as they seem. What I mean by that is in the world of startups, you're going to have days where you think you've just nailed it and it's just perfect and you're going to be big. Celebrate those, but also in the back of your mind realize it's not as good as I think it is. Like measure it. We're going to have to overcome a hurdle tomorrow. And when it's as low as it gets in startup land, which is low, it's not just like, oh, I might get let go. It's like you're responsible for hundreds of other people, and everything that is going on is on your shoulders. Take a breath and try to, and know that put one foot in front of the other, because it's not as bad as you actually think it is. And we saw some pretty dark days, but if you have that mentality, you can go through the emotional roller coaster that is being a founder, and you'll have maybe not this, but if you can kind of keep it in that range, you have a chance of navigating it successfully.
Great. Thank you. Also, one last question with Tandem Invest, because we do have a lot of founders that are listening to this. What is your investor thesis?
We do a lot of pre-seed and seed. I really am looking at the founders and product market fit, seeing how similar they were to Divi in terms of, do they know who they're selling to? Do they pass that billboard theory? And if they do, and I feel like confident in the founders and their product market fit, not their market, that's totally different. Then we'll usually want to put together an investment into that group. Usually it's around $1 million or more. And if they don't, I don't care about the valuation. I don't care about how big the market is. I want to see product market fit in the early stages. And from there, we usually write about $1 million check out of the fund.
Well, Alex, really appreciate your time today. Hopefully, sometime I can see you in the Mountain West, potentially going skiing or something cool. I know you're into outdoors and amazing food. Those are two things that I love as well. Um, but really appreciate your time today, and thank you so much, Alex.
Hey, sounds good. Thank you.